Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, thank you guys for joining us, and welcome to our virtual session, a virtual rituals, a how-to for MORs. I'm Mackenzie Lalka, and I serve AKSI as the Associate Director of Education, and I'll be producing the webcast today. So before we dive into the content, just gonna cover a few housekeeping details. All participants have been muted, and we are gonna ask you to go ahead and keep you muted during the presentation so we can all hear the presenter. And you have been started with your video turned off, but if you would like to turn your video on for others to see you, you may choose to do so. We do have the chat feature available, so you can enter any questions that you have throughout the presentation in the chat. It does share your first name, but if you're interested, go ahead and consider sharing your chapter and your university as well. At the end of the presentation, we're gonna have a little bit of Q&A, so go ahead and submit any questions you have in the chat feature, and we'll get to those questions at the end. So for our program today, we have past fraternity president Mike Dickerson, who's going to talk about virtual rituals. So at this point, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and thank you everyone for being here on the webinar today. I hope everyone's staying safe and trying to keep going as much as you possibly can in this very uncertain time. So we're here today to talk about rituals, and this is a unique opportunity for Alpha Kappa Psi to really understand what it is we do that's unique, that makes us more of a fraternity than just an online club or group. But to start off, let's talk about the ritual across the entire organization. But it's also designed to show, I'll say, pomp and circumstance and something that makes people more impressed with our history. We have been around for over a century. But it's also designed to be done in person, in a room, and there's lots of things that are in a ritual trunk that, if you're a master rituals or you've been involved in before, you've seen and have more impressive interpretation of it when it's in person. But now we can't do that. Universities across the country and across the world are closed, and we're all trying to continue Alpha Kappa Psi operations in a virtual environment. So the big question is, can the ritual be done virtually? Yes. Absolutely. It can be done virtually. I'll explain that in a minute. Understand that the ritual, as it's been written prior in the big white spiral-bound notebook that all chapters have at least 10 copies of, is designed to be done in person. And there is a misconception across the organization that it's a secret and no one can know about it. And if anyone hears about the rituals not in Alpha Kappa Psi, something bad's going to happen. That's not true. Right now, we are rewriting the ritual, and the board is delegated to the president and CEO, and they're working with a volunteer and staff team to get the ritual tweaked to be done virtually. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's talk about the difference between the public and the private parts, or the secret parts, of Alpha Kappa Psi. Interesting fact, there are only 4 secret things in Alpha Kappa Psi, and really 3 if you think about it. The first one is our handshake. The handshake is instructed to you when you become a member, and it's expected to be done anytime you interact professionally with another member. We're not going to get into the current situation of whether or not we actually should be shaking hands. There's no elbow bump in Alpha Kappa Psi. That's like a secret thing right now. But when this is all over and we're all back in school and we're all back together, the handshake will be something that will be maintained. But it is a secret in the sense that we don't really describe it written down anywhere. Next is the password. The password of Alpha Kappa Psi is described to you when you are initiated as a member. And it's something that when you write an email to an Alpha Kappa Psi member, you'll see at the end in you and I. That is the password. And it's written out in you and I because you don't actually write out the whole thing. If you wrote the actual words out, it wouldn't really be a password and a secret, would it? The next thing that's secret is the motto. The motto of Alpha Kappa Psi is the rough translation of what the Greek letters Alpha Kappa Psi stand for. And those are given to you, again, when you're initiated. Most of the secret things happen at the initiation members ritual. And finally, robes. The robes are not a secret per se because they're just robes. People get them dry cleaned. Please get them dry cleaned. And it's not designed to be seen by an outsider because to them, they wouldn't understand the context of it. But the public parts of the ritual are everything else. So really, when you break it down, if you take out the stuff that's secret from the ritual, it becomes a public ritual. If you don't have the regalia and things on the altar, like the Master Scroll and your description of the coat of arms and the movements, it's not really a secret. It's just something that is for Alpha Kappa Psi members only. And so that's why we have certain rituals that are written in the book as public and certain ones written as private. So As we're going through the ritual, trying to figure out what are the immediate things that people in chapters need to do now in April 2020, throughout the spring semester, and potentially going into the fall semester, just be realistic and make sure we're planning ahead. There are certain things that we have taken out to make sure that you can do it virtually. So the most significant changes are we've reduced the number of speaking roles. If you take the initiation of Alpha Kappa Psi members ritual, there are 8 speaking roles. You don't count the front and rear guides as speaking roles, but everything else has speaking role. We've lowered that down to at most 3 people are speaking in a ritual. We've also taken away the description of physical objects. So for example, there's a line that says the 4 candles that are on the altar represent the Brooklyn 4, I'm paraphrasing. Obviously, there's not going to be an altar, and obviously you're not going to have everyone in a room, so we've taken that part of the ritual out. The symbolism is still there, but we're not saying, look over here because there's nothing to look at. Also, we've taken out the repeat after me parts. If you've been in a chapter meeting on Zoom or any kind of meeting on Zoom for the past couple of weeks, you know the chaos that can ensue when everyone's trying to talk at the same time and it breaks the internet. So what we've done now is in parts where you're giving an oath or doing whatever involves a back and forth, basically we're saying, if you don't agree, sign off now. Otherwise, listen to these words and you kind of repeat it in your head. And there's also no signing of a master scroll book. There's no physical pinning. Again, you can't pin someone if you're not in the same room as them. And finally, there's no movement, obviously. So when chapters come back in the fall semester or whenever they come back, the fraternity is going to provide a lowercase r ritual to pick up the parts that weren't done during the virtual time. So the actual signing of the master scroll, the pins, the certificates. Keep in mind, the Heritage Center is currently closed physically. Not everyone is working in the building right now. Mackenzie's at her house, everyone's at home. So certificates and pins are done on a case-by-case basis as things are happening going forward. But right now, just stay flexible. You're going to initiate your members. They're not going to get their pin when the day they're initiated. That's okay. They're still members of Alpha Kappa Psi. Some chapters are actually taking the shirts they may have bought with their rush budgets or whatever and are sending it to the members at home so they have something to remember themselves by. And they're all wearing it during their chapter Zoom meetings. That's cool. So what rituals can be done right now, as of today, April 15th, 2020? So there's the initiation ritual. This is the one that every chapter is going to have to do this semester, assuming you have pledges. The graduation of seniors, not demit. Demit means to quit. The graduation ceremony will be done not by the chapters, but at the fraternity level. I believe there's 4 of them that Thomas and Jackie and the VPs and the RDs are going to be leading, so all the seniors can have a big joint celebration. This is probably the biggest change in that we're not having chapters do this ritual. We're doing it at the fraternity level. Officer installation and pledge induction are also designed to be done virtually. The biggest change with officer installation is when you pass the gavel from president to president, unless you're roommates that existed prior to COVID and you're still living together, you're not going to be physically giving them the gavel. But again, you'll figure it out as you need to pass them that in the near term. And then pledge induction for the fall, or if you are in a school that's a quarter school or somehow doing pledges right now, you can still do that too. If you need any of these rituals, email your CERC and your regional director and they'll provide that to you. The Heritage Center has the official formal approved versions to send to all the chapters. Remember, Court of Honor, the Court of Honor itself and midterm interviews are not rituals anymore, but the Court of Honor is usually done in conjunction with initiation. So if you have questions about any of this, remember, put it into the chat feature in Zoom and I'll move on. So here are the guidelines on how to do a virtual ritual. It's not as formal. It's not as impressive. I get it. I've been involved with the Rituals Alpha Kappa Psi for almost 2 decades now. I know how cool it can be when it's actually done in person. That's not going to be the case right now. So you need to use the actual board approved or board delegated approved version of the ritual that you need to use. Email your CERC to get this. Make sure that you're using the right one that's designed to be done virtually. It will say virtual ritual on the first page. Those ones have been designed to be no movement, minimal speakers, but you're still doing all the stuff you have to do. You're still taking the same oath. You're still doing everything else that is real pure AKSI. Next, if you're doing a big thing and you want to use the official Alpha Kappa Psi Zoom accounts through your areas or your regions or whatever, make sure you email ahead of time to make sure there's no conflicts. A lot of people have their own private Zoom accounts, but those usually have a 40-minute limit. And depending on if you're doing something in conjunction with a chapter meeting, you might run over that. Also, make sure that everyone who's joining in has the right login information, and then do what Mackenzie did earlier, mute everyone ahead of time unless they're actually going to be talking. You don't want the background noise. I can tell you how many conference calls and over phone and video I've been on where you have someone in the background making a lot of noise, and it's very hard to do anything. Next, just like anything else, you can't start before 7 a.m., you can't end after 11 p.m., but here's the kicker. Pay attention to time zones. When everyone's in the same room, it's super easy. 7 a.m. is 7 a.m. when you're all together on campus. But if you are at NYU up in New York City and you have students from all over the world who go to NYU, understand that if you're doing something at noon on a random day, it might be 7 p.m. somewhere in Europe or 2 a.m. somewhere in Asia, depending on where your students come from. So be cognizant of times. A lot of chapters have done a really interesting thing where they have parceled out the initiation ceremonies in conjunction with multiple Court of Honor presentations. So one chapter had 4 Court of Honor presentation blocks that a pledge could sign up for over the course of a day, depending on where they physically were. And as soon as that was done, those 3 or 4 pledges that were in that time block, they did the initiation ceremony. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to do. And so over the course of that day, they initiated all their members and had all the Court of Honor presentations done, but they didn't have everyone have to get on at the same time at 2 a.m., 7 a.m., noon, depending on your time zone. So it was more conducive to that. Next, this is more of a, you have to trust them. Make sure that it's just AKSI people that are in the call. Sometimes it can't be avoided. You're going to have siblings and family members and roommates, and that's fine. Nothing in these rituals is one of the 3.5 secret things that Alpha Kappa Psi has. So if someone overhears it, it's okay. We're not going to get mad at you. Also, remember, very few people speak. In fact, I think in 3 of the 4 rituals, it's just the president and the MOR. And one of them might have the chapter advisor or warden do a small speaking part. I think that's the officer installation ritual. But otherwise, it's just those 2. And that cuts on the background noise and the pauses. It makes it flow more organically. And finally, the only thing you need from your ritual trunk is the president's gavel. If you don't have a gavel, find something else that's more impressive than a normal hammer would be in your house. But if you have a gavel, that's good. If not, that's okay. One thing I didn't write down is try to, as best you possibly can, keep a good decorum. I know it's weird. I know it's awkward. I know it's strange to be talking to a computer and trying to speak something that isn't naturally spoken. But get the ritual ahead of time, read it, understand your parts, and then don't laugh, don't smile, don't giggle while you're giving it, because keep in mind, this is the best we can do in this situation. And the pledges that are being initiated or the officers that are being installed, this is their time to go through those ceremonies. And whereas you may have had an opportunity in person to have a really solemn, decorum-based event, they don't have that. And so try to make it as good for them as you possibly can. So those are the guidelines. It's relatively simple, relatively straightforward. There is 4 rituals out there right now. We are continuing to adjust as we possibly can. The key things here are flexibility, accommodation of members' needs, and communication. Make sure everyone knows what's going on. Make sure your CERC, your chapter advisor, your regional director know what you're doing, when you're doing it, so that way they can help out if they possibly can. And if you have questions, contact any of them. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that might be out there or in the chat.
Perfect. We don't have any in the chat yet, so definitely if you have some, go ahead and get them in chat. We'll get those over to Mike. Mike, I know you have seen a few virtuals. What kind of best practices have you seen from the ones that you've been able to join in on?
So one where the host enforces everyone being muted is good. The background noise is not a good thing. It's also good, and it kind of helps with the virtual presence if when you're being part of a ritual, if you're able to have your cameras turned on. So that way, at least you can see everyone's faces. It's really a lot more impressive when you have a chapter initiating its members and you can see all the faces of the current brothers and new brothers at the same time versus a bunch of black screens that just have names on it. I get it. Sometimes you just can't have that, but if you're able to do that, that's good. Additionally, like I mentioned earlier, the best practice of having different time blocks to do these rituals is crucial. The time zone thing matters. A lot of our universities have people that are living at home that are in the same time zone. And you have to understand that it's not fair to ask someone who is already stressed out with social distancing, might be taking care or know of someone who is sick and is trying to get through a virtual school environment to also wake up at 2 a.m. to get initiated. That doesn't make any sense. It's not fair to them. So flexibility is key. And finally, the president and the MOR of the chapter need to be in sync with what's going on because those are the two people that are involved in all these rituals going forward.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Still not seeing anything else in chat. So definitely if you have any questions for Mike, now's the time to go ahead and get them in. If you have any, he's here to answer whatever questions you have about rituals.
Yeah, I'll ask a question.
Go ahead.
All right, so I'm MOR for my chapter, Eta Omicron chapter, East Carolina University. You talked about having the initiation ritual, so we most definitely have to have the initiation this semester, correct?
Correct. If you're able to have the initiation this semester, you definitely should. And also understand that the Bridge to Brotherhood requirements are flexible depending on what the education department and your regional management team say. There's certain things you have to do in it, but things like electives you shouldn't be doing anymore, things that are beyond what's written down because you just can't get together, should definitely be looked at with a hard lens to say, do we really have the ability to do that properly?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Got a question from New Pi. Diego says, I'm the MOR from the New Pi chapter at Trinity. We already did Court of Honor March 28th when the consensus was the same as initiation. How would that work now? So the initiation ritual, the key thing there is the oath. So if you did the oath for your members, for your new members, and they took it, and then you, after the fact, reported them in the systems that AKSI has in chapter spot, then you're good to go. If you didn't do that and you have the opportunity to do that, you really should. Again, flexibility is key. If for whatever reason Trinity can't get everyone back together to do it, you can administratively report them as members because if the chapter considers you having had done the Court of Honor and initiation ritual on the 28th of March, that's cool because when everyone comes back in the fall, hopefully the fall semester, you can re-up. One of the things that we're talking about now is doing a reaffirmation ritual for everyone, regardless in the fall, whether or not you initiated now or years ago, to get everyone kind of on the same page. David said, will the recording of this be sent out? That's a Mackenzie question.
Yes, the recording will be made available to everybody.
All right. Hey, Thomas. You're muted. I can unmute him.
With
I fixed him.
Update the rituals to a virtual version. So appreciate all the work you've been doing and helping us move forward during this time. So I just want to give you huge kudos for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate it. And thank you for your leadership and communication. I know this is a rough time for everyone, so I appreciate the steady hand you're giving the fraternity. So thank you for that. All right. So if there are no other questions, Mackenzie, over to you to close us out.
That's great. So thank you so much, Mike, for your time today and all the information you provide us about virtual rituals. And thanks everybody else for joining in. Just a quick reminder, go ahead and remember to log into the My AKSI community. You can engage with other members in the collaboration group and register for upcoming events on the events tab. We'll be populating that with more events here shortly. So thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you all in the My AKSI community.
Thanks, everyone.